The ship's alarms shrieked their last warning before the console erupted in a shower of sparks. Empress Valoria of the Thalassian Empire gripped the manual controls, her iridescent blue skin slick with purple blood where shrapnel had torn through her ceremonial armor. The royal vessel, once the pride of her fleet, was now little more than a burning coffin hurtling toward an unknown moon. Loyal to the end, she muttered to the ship's failing systems as the atmosphere caught the craft, turning the view screen white-hot. Her inner eyelids closed against the glare. Betrayed by her own high council, ambushed during what should have been a diplomatic journey, the bitter irony wasn't lost on her. 3 solar cycles of absolute rule, ended by treachery. The impact came with a deafening roar. Metal tore. Glass shattered. Valoria's body slammed against her restraints before darkness claimed her. When consciousness returned, she was hanging upside down, the taste of her own blood metallic in her mouth. With shaking hands, she released the safety harness and collapsed onto what had once been the ceiling of the command pod. Every movement sent agony through her tall, slender frame. System diagnostics, critical. Communications, dead. Location, unknown frontier moon, likely human-controlled territory. The empire she had ruled with an unwavering hand would assume she was dead, exactly as the conspirators had planned. Valoria dragged herself from the wreckage, 4-fingered hands clawing at loose soil as she emerged into harsh sunlight. Her crest, a delicate crown of sensory appendages that marked her royal lineage, hung limply against her skull, several tendrils severed and weeping fluid. The ship behind her was beyond salvation, a twisted mass of the once gleaming alloy that had carried her across galaxies. She managed to stand, swaying like sea grass in a current. Through blurred vision, she surveyed the landscape. Rolling hills of amber grass, sparse trees with silver leaves, a small structure in the distance. Human architecture, primitive and unadorned. Each step was agony, but Empress Valoria of the Seventh Dominion had not survived 3 assassination attempts and countless political maneuvers by surrendering to pain. She would reach that shelter, commandeer whatever resources she could find, and somehow return to her throne. The journey across the field seemed endless. Her ceremonial armor, now cracked and useless, weighed her down. Blood trailed behind her, marking her path like breadcrumbs. When she finally reached what appeared to be a dwelling, her strength abandoned her completely. Valoria collapsed at the foot of wooden steps leading to a covered porch. Her vision dimmed, but not before she registered the sound of a door opening and footsteps approaching. A human male stood over her, tall by their standards, with skin tanned by outdoor labor and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore simple clothing, not military. No weapons visible, though Valoria knew humans were never truly unarmed. Her translator implant, amazingly still functional, processed a startled exclamation. Holy hell! She tried to speak, to command, but only managed a wet cough that brought more purple blood to her lips. The human knelt beside her, surprisingly gentle hands turning her to assess her injuries. You're from the crash, he said, his voice deep and measured. I saw your ship come down. Valoria waited for the mockery, the triumph in seeing a Thalassian royal brought low. Humans had been the Empire's most resilient opponents, their stubborn colonies a perpetual thorn in her diplomatic corps' side. Instead, the man, Ethan, she would later learn, carefully lifted her broken form. I don't know if you understand me, he said, but you need medical attention. I'm taking you inside. As consciousness faded again, Valoria felt something unfamiliar cut through her pain and pride confusion. This was not how enemies behaved. This was not what she had been taught about humans. This was not how she expected her end to come. Consciousness returned to Valoria in fragments. The unfamiliar scent of wood smoke, the rough texture of hand-woven blankets against her skin, the dull throb of her wounds now less piercing than before. Her eyes fluttered open, inner lids retracting to reveal the alien environment. A simple room with wooden beams, natural light filtering through cloth curtains. She tried to rise, only to have pain lance through her side. A bandage wrapped her torso, crude but effective. Her royal armor had been removed, replaced by a simple garment of soft fabric. I wouldn't move too quickly if I were you, came a voice from the doorway. The human, Ethan, stood there, holding a steaming cup. 3 broken ribs, lacerations across most of your back. And whatever those tentacle things on your head are, they're injured too. They are sensory crests, Valoria replied automatically, her translator converting her native clicks and trills into human speech. symbolic of royal lineage among my people. If Ethan was surprised that she could understand him, he didn't show it. He merely nodded and approached, offering the cup. It's just broth. I don't know what your kind eats, but liquid protein seems like a safe bet. Valoria hesitated. Taking sustenance from an enemy was an act of submission in Thalassian culture. Yet the gnawing hunger in her stomach overrode pride. She accepted the cup with as much dignity as her prone position allowed. You know what I am, she stated, not a question. Ethan settled into a chair near the bed. Thalassian. Your empire's propaganda broadcasts reach even this far out. The blue skin and extra finger are pretty distinctive. Then you know what I represent. Valoria tasted the broth, surprisingly palatable, rich with nutrients her body craved. Why an enemy of your species? A flicker of something passed across Ethan's face, amusement, perhaps, or irony. Out here, I don't have enemies. Just neighbors and occasional visitors. Some more unexpected than others. Days passed in this strange limbo. Ethan tended her wounds without comment, changing bandages and applying salves that smelled of local herbs. He asked no questions about why an obviously high-ranking Thalassian had crashed on his remote homestead. Valoria's suspicion remained sharp, yet his consistent care was undeniable. On the fourth day, when she could finally sit upright without assistance, Ethan brought her a device he'd salvaged from her ship's wreckage. Found this when I went back to check for survivors. Figured it might be important to you. Valoria's heart quickened at the sight of her personal communication module. With trembling hands, she activated it, only to find the quantum connection severed. No way to contact her loyal forces, no way to alert them she survived. She was truly alone. There were no other survivors, she said flatly, setting the device aside. I guessed as much. Ethan leaned against the doorframe. Your ship's pretty thoroughly destroyed. Whatever hit you hard. My own people hit me. The words escaped before she could contain them, bitter and sharp. Ethan's expression remained neutral, but his eyes softened slightly. I've got some experience with that myself. That evening, Valoria insisted on leaving the bed. Her legs wobbled treacherously, but she refused his offered arm. Royal dignity was all she had left. He led her to the main room of his dwelling, spartanly furnished but meticulously clean. Through large windows, she could see rolling hills bathed in sunset, the wreckage of her ship a distant scar on the landscape. Why do you live so isolated? She asked as he prepared a simple meal. Same reason you're not demanding I bow to you anymore, he replied without looking up. Sometimes the roles we play wear thin. The directness of the observation stung. You know nothing of my responsibilities. True enough. He placed 2 bowls on the table. I just know what it looks like when someone's carrying a weight they're tired of. Seen it enough in mirrors. Over dinner, Ethan explained the basics of this moon, Erebus, a former mining colony abandoned after resource depletion, now home to a scattered population of farmers, ex-military, and others seeking distance from the central planets. No official government presence, no communications array powerful enough to reach Thalassian space. So I am stranded, Valoria concluded, the reality of her situation settling like cold stone in her stomach. For now, Ethan agreed. But stranded just means you have time to heal. And think. That night, lying awake in the unfamiliar bed, Valoria heard sounds from the main room, Ethan's voice, low and troubled, speaking into some communication device. She strained her damaged crest to hear, catching fragments, not a threat. My decision. Stay out of it. In the pale moonlight filtering through the window, Valoria examined her blue hands, the ceremonial markings now faded from her ordeal. For the first time in many cycles, no attendants hovered nearby, no guards stood watch, no advisors waited with urgent matters of state. For the first time since her coronation, Empress Valoria was simply herself. The sensation was as terrifying as it was liberating. Outside, a plaintive cry rose from some native creature. Inside, a fallen empress closed her eyes and dreamed not of thrones or power, but of the strange, calm gaze of a human who had seen her at her weakest and offered not scorn, but soup. The storm came without warning, turning day to twilight as ominous clouds swallowed the horizon. Valoria watched from the porch as Ethan secured equipment and livestock, 2 goat-like creatures, and a collection of avian specimens he kept for eggs and companionship. Atmospheric disruption, she observed, her crests now partially healed and sensing the air pressure dropping rapidly. We should expect electrical discharges and high winds. Ethan glanced up from tightening the last shelter door. You mean lightning and a whole lot of trouble. These spring storms can tear buildings apart. After 2 weeks in his care, Valoria moved with only mild discomfort, her body's natural regeneration accelerated by unexpected compatibility with Ethan's medicinal herbs. She had begun contributing to the household, cataloging his botanical specimens with her superior knowledge of xenobiology, preparing simple meals from his stored provisions. "I should retrieve my ship's emergency beacon," she said suddenly. "If water damage destroys it." Too late. Ethan pointed to the dark wall of precipitation advancing across the plains. "That wreckage is 3 miles out. Storm will hit before we're halfway there." The rain arrived like a battering ram, hammering the roof with such violence that conversation became impossible. Valoria helped Ethan seal windows and doors as wind threatened to tear the dwelling from its foundations. When water began seeping through the ceiling in the storage room, they worked side by side, moving supplies to higher shelves. In the confined space, Valoria became acutely aware of his proximity, the heat radiating from his body, the controlled strength in his movements, the focused intensity in his eyes. Humans ran hotter than Thalassians, and in the cool dampness, his warmth was a gravity well pulling at her senses. A tremendous crack split the air as lightning struck nearby. The lights flickered and died. "Generators gone," Ethan muttered, retrieving manual illumination devices, primitive chemical lanterns that cast a warm glow through the darkness. "This is going to be a long night." They retreated to the main room, where a stone fireplace provided both heat and light. Ethan added wood to the flames while Valoria wrapped herself in one of his spare garments, a sweater, he called it, though the loose-fitting clothing nearly swallowed her slender frame. "Your people," Ethan said, settling beside her on the floor cushions. "Do they have weather like this?" "The Imperial homeworld is climate-controlled," she replied. "We engineer our environment rather than submit to its whims." "Sounds sterile." "It is. Perfect." The word felt hollow even as she spoke it. "Or so I was raised to believe." Another crash of thunder, closer this time. Valoria's crest flared involuntarily, a reaction to the sound waves that would have embarrassed her in Imperial court. Here, with only Ethan as witness, she felt no need to suppress the instinctual response. "Does it hurt?" he asked, gesturing to her crests. "When they move like that?" "No. They are sensory organs. More sensitive since the injury, but healing." She hesitated, then added, "Among my kind, it would be considered intrusive to comment on another's crests." "Sorry," he said, but his eyes remained curious rather than contrite. "But," she continued, surprising herself, "between allies, such observations are permitted. Is that what we are now? Allies?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications. 2 weeks ago, she would have considered the suggestion absurd. Now, she found herself nodding slowly. Against this storm, at least. The night deepened, and as the worst of the weather raged outside, they talked. Ethan spoke of his military service, of battles fought not against the Thalassians, but against corporate warlords who used human colonists as pawns. Of his disillusionment when he discovered his commanders were no better than those they fought. In turn, Valoria revealed the isolation of imperial rule, the constant vigilance against assassination, the political marriages that left her powerful but alone. She omitted strategic details that might compromise imperial security, though who such security served now, she could not say. "You never married for love, then?" Ethan asked, adding the last of his firewood to the dwindling flames. "Love is a luxury for those without responsibility," she replied automatically, repeating the palace doctrine. Then, more honestly, though I sometimes wondered what it might be like. The fire cast dancing shadows across his features as he studied her. "And now? What does an empress want when she's not being an empress?" The question struck her like a physical blow. Want. Empresses did not want. They commanded, decreed, ordained. Yet here, stripped of her authority, her wants had become painfully clear. Safety, respect, connection. "I want," she began, but the rest of her words were lost as the window behind them shattered. Wind and rain exploded into the room. Ethan moved with surprising speed, pulling Valoria away from the flying glass. They tumbled to the floor, his body sheltering hers as debris whipped around them. Without thought, Valoria's arms encircled him, clinging to his solid warmth in the chaos. They crawled to the relative safety of the hallway, pressed together in the narrow space as Ethan reached past her to close the interior door, sealing off the damaged room. In the darkness, their faces were inches apart, breath mingling, hearts racing from adrenaline and something else entirely. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice low. "No," she whispered, suddenly aware of every point where their bodies touched. Her crests flushed with color, a physiological response impossible to hide. A Thalassian display of attraction as unmistakable as it was involuntary. Ethan's gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes, a question in his expression. Valoria had negotiated peace treaties and waged wars with a word. She had ruled billions with unwavering authority. Yet this simple human connection, required more courage than any imperial decree. She closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a gesture she knew humans considered intimate. For a heartbeat, he remained still, surprised. Then his hand rose to cradle the back of her head, careful of her healing crests, as he returned the kiss with gentle intensity. Outside, the storm continued its assault. Inside, a different kind of tempest, one of trust, desire, and possibility, began to take shape between an exiled empress and the human who had become so much more than her reluctant host. Morning light filtered through the makeshift coverings Ethan had secured over the broken window. Valoria woke slowly, her body curled against his on the narrow cot they dragged into the kitchen, the only room untouched by the storm's fury. His arm rested protectively around her waist, his breathing deep and even in sleep. The events of the night replayed in her mind, the desperate kiss in the hallway, the tentative touches that followed, the discovery of unexpected compatibility between their different biologies. What had begun as comfort amid chaos had evolved into exploration, culminating in an intimacy that defied everything she'd been taught about humans. Carefully, she extricated herself from his embrace and moved to the window. The landscape outside was transformed, trees uprooted, fields flooded, debris scattered across what had once been orderly grounds. Her ship, visible in the distance, had been further broken by nature's wrath. Quite a mess, Ethan said from behind her, his voice still rough with sleep. Valoria turned to find him watching her, his expression unguarded in a way she had rarely seen. No calculation, no veiled intent, just simple regard. The structural damage is significant, she agreed, uncertain whether they were discussing the homestead or something more personal. He crossed to her, hesitating before brushing a finger lightly over one of her crests. The touch sent a pleasant shiver through her nervous system. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. An empress would never admit regret. It showed weakness, indecision. But Valoria was no longer certain she was that empress anymore. "No," she answered truthfully. "Though it complicates matters." His smile was slight, but genuine. "Life out here is nothing but complications." They spent the morning assessing damage and making repairs, working side by side with an easy rhythm that belied their short acquaintance. Valoria found herself adapting to manual labor with unexpected satisfaction. There was honesty in physical work that imperial politics had never offered. Immediate results, clear purpose, shared accomplishment. As Ethan secured a tarp over the roof, Valoria paused to observe him. Humans were remarkably adaptable creatures, one of the traits that had made them such formidable adversaries to the Empire. Yet everything she'd been taught about their inherent aggression, their barbaric individualism, seemed at odds with the man before her. "Something on your mind?" Ethan asked, catching her gaze. "I was considering the propaganda my people spread about yours," she admitted. "It's inaccuracies." He climbed down from the roof, wiping sweat from his brow. "We probably say plenty of wrong things about Thalassians too. Easier to hate what you don't understand." "Indeed." She hesitated, then added, "The coup that brought down my ship. It was staged because I proposed peace negotiations with human colonies." Ethan's eyebrows raised. "That would explain the assassination attempt. Warmongers exist in every species, I guess." "The High Council called it weakness," Valoria continued, the words painful but necessary. 3 decades of military stalemate, yet suggesting diplomacy was seen as betrayal. "And now they think you're dead." Ethan leaned against a support beam, studying her. "Which makes you dangerous to them if you're not." That evening, after salvaging what they could from the storm's aftermath, they sat before the repaired fireplace, sharing a bottle of amber liquid Ethan called whiskey. It burned Valoria's throat, but left a pleasant warmth in its wake, much like the man himself. "I carry 28 confirmed kills," Ethan said abruptly, staring into his glass. "Military service, all legal under combat protocols. Clean record, honorable discharge." Valoria waited, sensing the confession was not complete. "But the 29th. His voice hardened. "That one wasn't in any report." Corporate commander ordering civilian executions. I put a bullet in his head and walked away from everything. You killed for justice, Valoria observed. I killed because I was angry, he corrected. Justice was just a convenient excuse. Been hiding from that truth ever since. The raw honesty of his admission stirred something in Valoria, a need to offer equal vulnerability. I ordered the sterilization of a rebellious mining colony, she said, her voice steady despite the shame the memory evoked. 17,000 workers. No executions, but no future generations either. It was deemed merciful compared to orbital bombardment. She expected disgust, rejection. Instead, Ethan reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. We all have blood on our hands, he said simply. Question is what we do with the life we have left. Later, in the darkness of his bedroom, their bodies entwined again, more deliberately than the desperate passion of the storm night. Valoria mapped the topography of his scars, battle wounds, she recognized, each with its own story. He, in turn, traced the ceremonial markings embedded in her skin, symbols of imperial status now stripped of meaning. If they found you, Ethan murmured against her shoulder, what would happen? Public execution, she replied. A traitor's death to secure the new regime's legitimacy. His arms tightened around her. And if they don't find you? The question held possibilities she had not permitted herself to consider. A life beyond the throne. A future not dictated by imperial protocol. I don't know, she admitted. I've never been anything but what I was raised to be. Maybe that's the silver lining of losing everything, he suggested, his fingers gentle in her crests. You get to choose what matters now. Valoria closed her eyes, allowing herself to imagine such freedom. But as she drifted toward sleep, a flicker of unease disturbed her newfound peace. In the wreckage of her ship lay the emergency beacon, dormant but intact, its quantum signature recognizable to any Thalassian military vessel within 50 parsecs. If the storm hadn't destroyed it, it remained a silent sentinel, waiting to broadcast her location to those who would ensure she never returned to power, or to life itself. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that far above Erebus's atmosphere, a Thalassian hunter-killer vessel had already detected the faint emission from that very beacon, disturbed by the storm's electrical fields. Its commander, loyal to the new regime, had already set course for the coordinates. In her sleep, Valoria pressed closer to Ethan's warmth, unaware that their fragile sanctuary had already been compromised, and that by morning, she would face the choice that would define whatever remained of her life. Dawn broke with unusual clarity after the storm, painting the ravaged landscape in soft gold. Valoria stood on the porch, sipping the bitter beverage Ethan called coffee, surveying the cleanup work ahead. Her body felt different, stronger, not just from physical healing, but from something more profound. A sense of purpose beyond survival. Ethan emerged from the barn carrying repair supplies, his smile warming when he spotted her. Over these past weeks, those smiles had become more frequent, less guarded. Last night's shared confessions had removed the final barriers between them, imperial ruler and military deserter replaced by simpler truths, woman and man, survivors finding unexpected solace in each other. She raised her mug in greeting, but the words died in her throat as her crest suddenly flared with alarm. Vibrations in the atmosphere, familiar ones. Her gaze snapped skyward, searching. There. A distortion of light against the clouds, the telltale shimmer of Thalassian cloaking technology. Ethan, she called, voice tight with urgency. We have visitors. He followed her gaze, squinting. Military. Hunter-killers. Elite assassination squad. She set down the mug, calculations racing through her mind. They must have detected my beacon during the storm. Ethan was already moving, retrieving something from beneath the porch boards, a military-grade pulse rifle she hadn't known he possessed. How many? Standard deployment is 6. Possibly more for a high-value target. She met his eyes. You should run. They want me, not you. Not happening. His jaw set in a stubborn line she'd come to recognize. This is my home. Ethan, we've both been running from who we were, he cut her off. Maybe it's time we both stopped. The air cracked with the distinctive sound of Thalassian transport beams. In the clearing beyond the house, 6 figures materialized, armored soldiers in the black and silver of the Imperial Guard, now serving new masters. At their center stood Commander Raxel, his facial scars identifying him instantly to Valoria. It seems the rumors of your survival were correct, Empress, Raxel called, his translator broadcasting in both languages. Though Empress is no longer your title. Valoria stepped forward, positioning herself between the soldiers and Ethan. "Commander, you were once sworn to my service." "I serve the Empire, not the ruler," Raxel replied coldly. "The Council has declared you traitor and sentenced you accordingly. The execution will be broadcasted across Thalassian space." "And the human?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Raxel glanced dismissively at Ethan. "Irrelevant, unless he interferes." Ethan moved to stand beside her, rifle held casually but ready. "I'm definitely the interfering type." The commander signaled his squad, who spread out in a practiced formation. "Your choice, Valoria. Come willingly and die with dignity, or resist and die in shame, along with your human companion." Time seemed to slow as Valoria stood at the precipice of decision. Behind her lay a humble dwelling where she had known more genuine connection than in all her cycles of imperial rule. Before her stood the remnants of a life built on power and isolation. The choice was simultaneously impossible and utterly clear. "I will not return," she stated, her voice carrying the authority that had once commanded star systems. "The empire I served is already dead if it sends assassins rather than diplomats." "Then you die here." Raxel raised his hand to signal the attack. What happened next occurred with such speed that later, Valoria would struggle to reconstruct the sequence. Ethan fired first, his rifle's pulse dropping one soldier. She ducked beneath energy blasts, drawing the ceremonial dagger she'd kept from her wrecked ship. The guards advanced with mechanical precision. A shot grazed her shoulder, burning through flesh. She heard Ethan cry out, but couldn't locate him in the chaos. Blood, both purple and red, stained the ground as the skirmish intensified. Her Imperial combat training returned instinctively, her body moving with lethal efficiency despite weeks of recovery. When a momentary break in the fighting allowed her to gain perspective, she saw 3 guards down, Ethan crouched behind an overturned piece of equipment, wounded but still fighting. Raxel and the remaining soldiers had taken defensive positions near the transport coordinates. "Impressive," Raxel called, "but futile. Our ship carries reinforcements. Surrender now, and the human lives." Valoria knew it was a lie. No witnesses would be permitted. She caught Ethan's eye across the battlefield, something passing between them without words. He nodded slightly, understanding her intent without explanation. She stepped into the open, arms raised. "Commander Raxel, I invoke the right of Imperial challenge." Raxel paused, clearly surprised. The right of challenge was ancient Thalassian law, a direct combat between nobles to resolve succession disputes. By invoking it, she forced his hand. To deny the challenge would invalidate his authority in front of his soldiers. "You have no standing to invoke the challenge," he argued, but she could see uncertainty in his posture. "I still wear the royal markings," she countered. "Until my death, the challenge remains my right." Slowly, Raxel stepped forward, signaling his remaining guards to hold position. He drew his ceremonial blade, a cruel, curved weapon designed for the ritual combat. "As you wish. Your death will simply be more personal." They circled each other in the dirt clearing, the morning sun glinting off their blades. Raxel was younger, stronger, but Valoria carried decades of formal training and something more, a reason to survive beyond mere power. Her gaze flicked briefly to Ethan, who had shifted position, his rifle trained on the remaining guards. Raxel struck first, blade slashing with practiced precision. Valoria parried, feeling the impact reverberate through her healing bones. They exchanged blows, testing defenses, searching for weaknesses. Blood, hers, splattered the ground as a strike penetrated her guard, cutting across her torso. "The Council was right," Raxel taunted. "You've grown soft. Contaminated by human sentiment." She didn't waste breath responding, conserving energy as she retreated, drawing him away from his soldiers. When her back foot struck a piece of storm debris, she stumbled deliberately. Raxel lunged for the killing blow. It was the opening she needed. Valoria dropped beneath his strike, driving her dagger upward into the vulnerable joint of his armor. Raxel's momentum carried him forward, impaling himself further. His shocked expression as he collapsed was one of disbelief rather than pain. The remaining guards raised their weapons, but Ethan's rifle fire scattered them. In the confusion, Valoria seized Raxel's command module from his armor and activated the emergency protocol, a blinding flash of light and energy that disrupted the communication link to the orbiting vessel. When vision returned, the guards were retreating, dragging their wounded toward the transport coordinates. Without Raxel to command them, and with the ship temporarily blinded, they defaulted to self-preservation. Valoria staggered to where Ethan had fallen, his side burned by energy weapons but his eyes still fierce and alert. Together they watched as the Thalassian soldiers dematerialized, returning to their ship. "They'll be back," Ethan said, grimacing as she examined his wound. "No," Valoria replied, holding up Raxel's command module. "Not if we act quickly." Inside the house, as they patched each other's injuries, she explained. The module contained command codes for Raxel's ship, enough to send a false mission-complete signal to the central command. With her royal authorization codes, still genetically encoded in her blood, she could order the vessel to depart. "They'll believe I'm dead," she concluded, applying healing salve to Ethan's burn. "At least for a time." "And when they eventually discover the truth?" he asked, watching her manipulate the alien technology. Valoria paused, looking up to meet his gaze. "By then, perhaps we will have found a different truth to offer them." The command signal sent, they stood together on the porch as the faint distortion of the Thalassian ship became visible briefly before vanishing into hyperspace. The morning was eerily quiet after the violence, birds gradually returning to the trees as if nothing had happened. "What happens now?" Ethan asked softly. "To an empress without an empire?" Valoria looked out over the damaged homestead, then back to the human who had changed everything. Her crests, fully healed now, shimmered with iridescent color, a display of emotion no imperial protocol would have permitted. "Now," she said, taking his hand, "I become what you have already seen in me. Something more than a crown." He pulled her gently closer. "And what about us? A human and a Thalassian isn't exactly conventional." She smiled, a gesture she had adopted from him. "I've had enough of convention. I would rather have this, reality, honesty, connection." "It won't be easy," he warned. "Others will come eventually." "Yes," she agreed. "And when they do, perhaps they will find something unexpected, proof that different worlds can join without conquest. A model for the peace I once tried to create through diplomacy." The sun climbed higher as they stood together, an exiled empress and a former soldier, their shadows stretching across the porch of a humble dwelling that had become so much more than shelter. Beyond them lay a damaged landscape slowly healing from the storm, not unlike the wounded histories they each carried. But in this moment, held in a fragile balance between what was and what could be, Valoria felt something that her imperial throne had never offered, not the cold certainty of power, but the warm possibility of hope. She leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, her crest softly brushing his skin, and together they faced the day, and all the days that would follow, not as empress and subject, not as alien and human, but simply as two beings who had found, against all odds, a home in each other. The crown of stars that had once defined her now gave way to something far more precious, a future written not in imperial decrees, but in shared breaths and intertwined hands, reaching toward a horizon neither could have imagined alone.